Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, in this lesson here, we'll be speaking about al-ism al-mawsool, which is the relative pronoun. So the relative pronoun, the ism mawsool, it's an ism that describes something specific by means of a sentence that follows it. This is a very complicated way to just say that it's the equivalent of who and which in English. So the ism mawsool is how you're going to say who, and it's how you're going to say which in the Arabic language. But if you want to go to more details, it's an ism that's going to describe something specific by means of a sentence that follows it. That sentence that follows it is going to be called silatul mawsool, the relative clause. So for example, I say الرجل الذي في البيت, the man who is inside the house. So who is a relative pronoun. It's ism mawsool. Why? Because it's an ism that's describing something specific by means of a sentence that follows it. الرجل, the man. What about him? الذي هو في البيت. في البيت is a sentence that's coming here and is specifying who's the man I'm really speaking about. So الذي is going to be called ism mawsool, and it's the equivalent of who in English. And fil bayti is going to be the relative clause, the silatul mawsool, the sentence that always comes after who and which. Now, the ism mawsool in Arabic is a bit more complex than in English. There are different types of ism mawsool based on not only the number of things, but also based on the gender of the thing that you're referring to. So the singular masculine is alladhi, which can be translated as who or which, depending on the context, which we're going to explain in a second. But the singular feminine version is allati. So if I'm referring to a man, I'm going to say al-rajulu alladhi. But if I'm referring to a woman, I would say, for example, al-muslimatu allati, the woman Muslim who, with allati instead of alladhi. So depending on what I'm referring to, whether it's male or female, I'm going to have to use either alladhi or allati, which both can be translated as who or which, depending on the context, which we're going to explain. The plural masculine is alladhina, which comes very often in the Quran, which has no direct equivalent in English, but we translate it as something along the lines of those who. So if I'm speaking about a group of Muslims that are males, I will say al-muslimun alladhina, the Muslims who, or those who. The plural feminine version of alladhina it has two different forms. There's allai and there's allati. So I'll say al-muslimat allai or al-muslimat allati. Either or is fine. So these are the different types of ism mawsool based on not only the number of the thing, but also the gender of the thing. Now I mentioned that alladhi and allati can be translated as who or which, depending on the context. How do I know what that means? Alladhi and allati are translated as who if it's referring to a rational thing, so human beings and things of that nature. Al-mar'atu allati fil bayt. Al-mar'atu, the woman, allati is referring to a woman who's a human being, so we translate it as who's inside the house. On the other hand, alladhi or allati, either or, will be translated as which if it's referring to an irrational thing, like cars and houses and animals and other things that are inanimate. And kitab alladhi ala al-maktab will be translated as the book alladhi which is on the desk. So that's how you differentiate between whether you're going to translate alladhi and allati as who or as which, depending on what they're referring to. Now we covered that there are also the plural forms of these, alladhina, and the feminine allai and allati. Now to bring examples for each and every single one of these, let's go on to the next slide, which will clarify exactly how this actually looks like. So examples for the masculine singular and the feminine singular are as so. Masculine singular, al-rajulu alladhi fil bayt, the man who is inside the house. Because al-rajul is masculine and it's also singular, I'm going to use alladhi instead of allati and instead of alladhina. Al-kitab alladhi ala al-maktab, alladhi is referring to an irrational thing, which is kitab, so I'm going to translate it as which, the book which is on the desk. The feminine singular form is allati, المرأة التي في البيت, the woman who is inside the house. Same thing for سيارة. سيارة is an inanimate object, but it has a ta marbuta, so we treat it as a feminine noun. So we're also going to use التي, but here is going to be translated as which. السيارة التي في الموقف, the car which is in the parking lot. Let's go on to the plurals. The masculine plural is الذين, but as I said, there's no direct equivalent to this in English, since we use who for both singular or plural. But in Arabic it would be like this: الرجال الذين في البيت. The men الذين, because the men here is plural, the men who are inside the house. The feminine version, اللاتي or اللائي, either or. النساء اللاتي في البيت, the women who are inside the house. That is a relative pronoun in a very brief sense, and how it functions and its different types.